our Dublin Srimad-Bhagavatam class on Tuesday the 17th of August. As ever, we'll start by chanting the beautiful bhajan, Jai Radha Madhava. Please join in. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Ganavallava Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Ganavallava Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yashodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Munatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Ganavallava Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. A reading from the Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 15. The Pandavas retire timely is the name of the chapter, or the title of the chapter. Text 12. Yat-tejasātha bhagavān yudhi śūla-pāṇir vismāpitaḥ sagirijo stram nijaṁ anye cāham amunaiva kalevareṇa prāpto mahendra-bhavane mahad-āsanārdham yat-tejasātha bhagavān yudhi śūla-pāṇir vismāpitaḥ sagirijo stram nijaṁ anye amunaiva kalevareṇa prāpto mahendra-bhavane mahad-āsanārdham yat-tejasātha bhagavān yudhi śūla-pāṇir vismāpitaḥ sagirijo stram nijaṁ anye amunaiva kalevareṇa prāpto mahendra-bhavane mahad-āsanārdham yat-tejasātha bhagavān yudhi śūla-pāṇir vismāpitaḥ sagirijo stram nijaṁ anye amunaiva kalevareṇa prāpto mahendra-bhavane mahad-āsanārdham yat-tejasātha bhagavān yudhi śūla-pāṇir vismāpitaḥ sagirijo stram nijaṁ anye cāham amunaiva kalevareṇa prāpto mahendra-bhavane mahad-āsanārdham. Yat, by whose, tejasa, by influence, ata, at one time, bhagavān, the personality of Godhead, Lord Śiva, yudhi, in the battle, śūla-pāṇir, one who has a trident in his hand, vismāpitaḥ, astonished, sagirijo, along with the daughter of the Himalaya mountains, stram, weapon, adān, awarded, nijaṁ, of his own, may, unto me, anye, so also others, cha, and, aham, myself, amunaiva, by this, eva, definitely, kalevareṇa, by the body, prāpto, obtained, mahendra-bhavane, in the house of Indra, mahad, great, āsanārdham, half elevated seat. Translation. It was by his influence only that in a fight I was able to astonish the personality of God, Lord Śiva, and his wife, the daughter of Mount Himālaya. Thus he, Lord Śiva, became pleased with me and awarded me his own weapon. Other demigods also delivered their respective weapons to me, and in addition I was able to reach the heavenly planets in this present body and was allowed a half elevated seat. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. By the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, all the demigods, including Lord Śiva, were pleased with Arjuna. The idea is that one who is favoured by Lord Śiva or any other demigod may not necessarily be favoured by the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna. Ravan was certainly a great devotee of Lord Śiva, but he could not be saved from the wrath of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Ramachandra. And there are many instances of that in the history of the Puranas. But here is an instance where we can see that Lord Śiva became pleased even in the fight with Arjuna. The devotees of the Supreme Lord know how to respect the demigods, but the devotees of the demigods sometimes foolishly think that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is no greater than the demigods. By such a conception, one becomes an offender and ultimately meets with the same end as Ravana and others. The instances described by Arjuna during his friendly dealings with Lord Śiva are instructive for all who may be convinced by the lessons that one can achieve all favours simply by pleasing the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna, whereas the devotees or worshippers of the demigods may achieve only partial benefits, which are also perishable, just as the demigods themselves are perishable. Another significance of the present verse is that Arjuna, by the grace of Lord Sri Krishna, was able to reach the heavenly planet, even with the self-same body, and was honoured by the heavenly demigod Indra, being seated with him half elevated. One can reach the heavenly planets by the pious acts recommended in the Shastra, in the category of fruitive activities, and as stated in the Bhagavad Gita 9:21, when the reactions of such pious acts are spent, the enjoyer is again degraded to this earthly planet. The moon is also on the level with the heavenly planets, and only persons who have performed virtues only, performing sacrifices, giving charity, and undertaking or undergoing severe austerities, can be allowed to enter into the heavenly planets after the duration of the life of the body. Arjuna was allowed to enter into the heavenly planets in the self-same body simply by the grace of the Lord. Otherwise, it is not possible to do so. The present attempts to enter into the heavenly planets by the modern scientists will certainly prove futile, because such scientists are not on the level of Arjuna. They are ordinary human beings without any assets of sacrifice, charity, or austerities. The material body is influenced by the three modes of material nature, namely goodness, passion, and ignorance. The present population is more or less influenced by the mode of passion and ignorance, and the symptoms for such influence are exhibited in their becoming very lusty and greedy. Such degraded fellows can hardly approach the higher planetary systems. Above the heavenly planets, there are many other planets also, which only those who are influenced by goodness can reach. In heavenly and other planets within the universe, the inhabitants are all highly intelligent, many more times than the human beings, and they are all pious in the higher and highest mode of goodness. They are all devotees of the Lord, and although their goodness is not unadulterated, still they are known as demigods, possessing the maximum amount of good qualities possible within this material world. Translation again. It was by his influence only that in a fight I was able to astonish the personality of God, Lord Śiva, and his wife, the daughter of Mount Himālaya. Thus he, Lord Śiva, became pleased with me and awarded me his own weapon. Other demigods also delivered their respective weapons to me, and in addition I was able to reach the heavenly planets in this present body and was allowed a half elevated seat. Om Ajana Tamarandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swaya Rupagadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama 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 Hari Hari Hare Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama 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 Hari Hari Hare Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama 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 Hari Hari. A very interesting as ever translation and purport from Srila Prabhupada. Let me start though with the reference to where Srila Prabhupada says, another significance of the present verse is that Arjuna, by the grace of Lord Krishna, was able to reach the heavenly planet even with the self-same body, and was honoured by the heavenly demigod Indra. One can reach the heavenly planets by the pious acts recommended in the Shastra in the category of fruitive activities. And then Prabhupada goes on to say, the present attempts to enter into the heavenly planets by the modern scientists will certainly prove futile, because such scientists are not on the level of Arjuna. So actually, the Prabhupada is writing that purport in the, gosh, I can't give it, I didn't research actually to give a specific date, but it's kind of like, you know, the turn of the decade from the 60s into the 70s. So the very late 60s into the early 70s is when Srila Prabhupada is writing this purport. So when he says the present attempts, he's referring to the famous moon landings in the late 60s and the early 70s, basically the Apollo missions around that time. And of course, I remember those times very well. I was a school kid during that period, and one of the things I guess I remember most actually was, because you've got your life ahead of you. I'm not sure my exact age. Well, actually, let's say in 1970, I was kind of 9, 10, that kind of age, and maybe a little older because that whole Apollo mission went on for a period of years. I'm not sure exactly how many, but I think by the mid 70s it had kind of petered out. So it was my kind of formative years from the age of 10 to 14, 15, that kind of time. So one of the things that I remember very clearly from all of that during that time was being in school. And we had one teacher, his name was Mr. Finn, I remember his name. And I guess at the time, he probably was in his, certainly his 40s, perhaps even his 50s. So he was, 30, 40 years older than the students or the pupils that he was teaching, like me. I remember it so vividly, him saying he was so envious of us, his students, the children, who, as I say, I would have been, in my early teens, maybe, that kind of age, 13 or something. And then he explained why he was so envious of his students. It's kind of funny, the material world's just an amazing place, actually, because I'll explain why he was saying he was envious of us. But just before I do, the material world is such a fascinating place, because when you're that age, 12, 13, that kind of age, 14, whatever it is, you're looking forward in one sense to your future life, but you're looking forward in such a way that you're wanting it to hurry up. There's this desire to hurry up. I want to be older. Certainly at that age, you think, can't wait till I'm 18. Once I'm 18, I've got all my freedoms and rights and whatever, and and I'm not under the direct supervision anymore of my parents. I can be liberated and free. And so as a young kid, the tendency is you're looking forward like that and wanting time to move fast, but then at some age, like in the case here of my teacher, now he's expressing envy about us because we're so young. So I often wonder, where is that sweet spot in the material world, in human existence? Where's the sweet spot where you're not somebody who is wanting time to move fast because you feel you're too young and you want your liberty and your freedoms, but at the same time, you're not getting old to the extent that you want the clock to stop because you realize you're getting older, by the minute, by the day, by the week, by the month, by the year, and you're kind of wanting things to stop and slow down. Is there ever a time that's the perfect age? That's a debate for another day. I would put forward the proposal or the suggestion or the argument that there isn't a sweet spot. There is never a time that, this is the perfect age. Simply because as soon as you say that, it's no longer the perfect age because time has moved on. Anyway, as I said, we can discuss that another time. Yes, so he was envious. He was telling us he was envious of us. And the reason he was envious was his argument went, or his presentation went, that, well, the reason I'm envious of you guys is because when you're my age, so spin forward another 30 years or whatever it was, I can't remember his exact age, but you spin forward roughly 30 years, his point was, you guys, you'll be going to the moon for your holidays, for your vacation, you'll be going to the moon. And his logic was a very reasonable logic, I kind of thought, was that just like with air travel, I remember a few years ago in Dublin Airport, they had all these big signs up for Aer Lingus, which is the national airline here in Ireland. It was their 75th anniversary, and they have a picture of their first flight like that. And you can see their first flight compared to today in terms of the plane itself, the exterior of the plane, and all other aspects. It was basic, it was relatively basic like that. And they would have had how many flights that day? They would have presumably had only just one flight, So now, it's like you have multiple upon multiple upon multiple flights every single day. And the planes are much quicker and all, whatever, more safe and all those kind of things. So things progress all the time. So Aer Lingus started at a certain point in time, 75 or probably 80 years ago now, when they had just that first flight, to where they are today. And the technology advances and everything sort of moves forward. So in that sense, his logic was the same with space travel. We're now at the very beginnings of it, so there's just this one flight and everyone's excited about it and all that. And of course we can go into the detail of that as well in some of the discussion, but just for the sake of this morning's class, that we just go along with that this was their first flight to go to the moon and all that kind of stuff. But his logic being that as time progresses, the technology will get better, and eventually in a few decades, like everything progresses, you guys will be going to the moon for your holidays. I'll miss out on that. I'll be an old man, maybe a dead man, so I'll miss out on all that. So that's why he was envious of us. And of course, he certainly planted in my brain, and I'm sure his other students' brains, that oh yeah, right, okay, in a few decades, people will be going to the moon for their holidays. But of course, that never happened. That never happened. In fact, they don't even really talk about, as far as I can figure out, they don't even really talk about going to the moon anymore. Which is, it's a very interesting dynamic. Why did that space travel not progress and become more or less the norm, just as air travel did? Because 100 years ago, there was no air travel. I don't know when the Wright brothers flew across the Atlantic, but whenever they did that, before that, there was just nothing, no air travel. And they went across in, a rickety kind of plane that was one of those things, But now, as we know, you've got all these super advanced kind of planes and what to speak of all the military stuff, the fighter jets and all those things, some of those things that can lift off like that vertically and boom, zip away. So it's all so advanced. So his point is an interesting point, and we all accepted it, and no one contested it when he first mentioned it to us. But it never happened. It never happened. We have to ask ourselves, why? Why did that never happen? So, here in the purport, Prabhupada gives a very, very clear reason why that didn't happen. And basically speaking, because we're not qualified. The moon, Chandraloka, is described as being a heavenly planet. Now, personally, my own view is that definitely, they can go to space, they can go through the atmosphere and go into, whatever, gravity-free, beyond the Earth's atmosphere. I have no doubts that they can do that. But that's different from actually going to a heavenly planet. And even if you accept the argument that they went to the moon, you see what they show you. They basically show you a kind of rocky, deserty landscape. It looks totally kind of boring and totally uninteresting, not much fun, And even to go to that place that doesn't look very interesting and there's not much fun, they have to put on these suits and all this kind of stuff and whatever. So the point that Prabhupada's making is, you cannot just buy a ticket and go to the heavenly planets. No, you have to be qualified, and you have to have a certain body to go there, etc. like that. Actually, there's one nice book that Srila Prabhupada wrote called "Easy Journey to Other Planets," and it's a very interesting read in relation to so-called space travel, etc. Okay. So basically, we have a body, and the body that we have, the material body that we have, works in the atmosphere and the planet that we live on. But if we want to go to some other planet where the atmosphere is different and whatever, we need one to be qualified, and through that qualification, we're given a suitable body to be able to live on that particular planet like that. But of course, just to make the point, which is an important point to make, and Prabhupada explains here that the residents of the heavenly planets, they're far more intelligent, etc., far more in the mode of goodness, and all of those things. They also live, extraordinarily long lives from the material point of view, like that. But still, the point is made. Abrahma Bhuvanal Loka, this point that Krishna makes in the Bhagavad Gita, that from the highest planet in the material world, because the heavenly planets are also in the material world, so from the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of suffering. And the reason they're places of suffering, the suffering on a relative level, the suffering is different, just as on a relative level, suffering is different in this world. The big news stories at the moment, as I'm speaking, the problems in Afghanistan, and you can see the people there, particularly the ones who want to leave, you know, they're suffering, and they're anticipating a lot of suffering coming. So we don't have that particular suffering here in Ireland, you know, in terms of fearing government, etc., and all that kind of thing. So just as the suffering is relative depending on what part of the planet that you exist on here on planet Earth, it's the same in the material world in general. So the suffering on the heavenly planets, or let's say, put it another way, the enjoyment on the heavenly planets far exceeds and is far superior to what we experience here on this particular planet, the Earth planet. But the explanation that Krishna gives that why there is still suffering even in those heavenly planets, from the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, is because repeated birth and death take place. So for us, that repeated birth and death is taking place, broadly speaking, on a 100-year cycle. There's very few of us that will live more than 100 years. In fact, for the vast majority of people, significantly less than 100 years. And as I say, very few that will live longer than that. So it's roughly a 100-year cycle. Whereas in the heavenly planets, depending on which planet you happen to be residing in, you know, you're going to have a minimum of a number of hundreds of thousands of years. So to some degree, you can put it to the back of your mind. But actually, for an intelligent person, you know, if something is going to happen at some point in the future, no matter how long away it may be, you know, for an intelligent person, you can't really put it to the back of your mind. So that's the reason why there's suffering everywhere in the material world, including the heavenly planets, because at some point you have to die, you have to leave the body that you're in, and you have to assume another body like that. So that's kind of Krishna's point. Another big point being made here in today's purport is about demigod worship. Now, this whole subject is a very interesting subject, because the demigods, and Prabhupada talks many times about this, that they're very qualified people, they're devotees, and of course they have very good karma very good karma, again, from a relative point of view, not from an absolute point of view, but from a relative point of view, they've got wonderful karma. And that's why they're existing in these, you know, heavenly places, heavenly planets, heavenly places. But how do we see them, and how do they see themselves? And if it's seen, if they understand their existence and their situation in context with Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then everything is wonderful, everything's fine. But if they don't, and the people who are you know, worshipping them don't see them in the proper context vis-a-vis their relationship with Krishna, then it becomes very problematic. So Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita, he talks about this subject, sa-taya shradaya yuktas tashadanam ihate, that Krishna's talking about, he says, endowed with such faith, one endeavours, meaning us, we endeavour to worship a particular demigod if we have faith, you know, and you know, because the demigods have such good karma from the relative point of view, living so long, have great opulences, you know, we even see here in the material world, people are very inclined to worship, you know, whether it be a sports star, you know, or a music star, or an actor, you know, God forbid a politician or whatever like that. People who have a prominent role in society, people, you know, people are inclined to actually look up to them and ultimately worship them like that. So Prabhupada's talking about the demigods that, you know, they have a particular faith, etc., in a certain demigod, and we see that particularly in what we would call India, where there's a big focus actually from many people in terms of demigod worship like that. And some of them are mentioned in this verse. I think Indra is mentioned, Lord Śiva is mentioned, etc. So worshipping them exclusively, you know, ignoring or just ignoring Krishna's role in all of this and the relationship that one has with Krishna, then that's problematic. And Krishna's talking about that. That if you just worship the demigods, thinking that everything's coming from them, that's problematic, because ultimately everything's coming from the Supreme Person, Lord Krishna, like that. So really the worship and the appreciation should be going to Krishna. Now, of course, it can go to the demigods also, as long as that clear understanding is there that ultimately this is coming for Krishna. And I think that was 722, the verse. The very next verse in the Bhagavad Gita, antavatu palante sham, it's more specific. Krishna's talking about the people with, I think the word used is small intelligence. They worship the demigods, and the result of that worship is the fruits are limited, and they're also temporary. And those who worship the demigods, they will go to the planets of the demigods. And again, going back to the earlier point, that may on a relative level sound fantastic. Wow, going to a place that, where the roads are made of diamonds, and the water sustains all life forms. It's so pure and full of all sorts of vitamins and minerals, etc. Your life duration is hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, etc. But ultimately it's temporary. Whereas going back to the spiritual world, as well as it being far more opulent than anything in the material world, anything in the heavenly planets, it's eternal. There is no end like that. So ultimately, it's a less intelligent thing to do, to focus on demigod worship and the demigods like that. However, you see them in the context of, as I say, Krishna and their relationship with Krishna. That's a totally different thing. Like even here in today's, is it the translation? It says, Lord Śiva, thus Lord Śiva, became pleased with me. No, sorry, my apologies. Oh yeah, sorry. It was by his influence only that in a fight I was able to astonish the personality of God, Lord Śiva and his wife. So Lord Śiva is a demigod, an extraordinarily powerful and glorious demigod. But he himself is known as Vaishnava yat-tejasātha. He's known as the best of the Vaishnavas, the best of the devotees, because he's worshipping Lord Krishna and he understands Lord Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So if that's Lord Shiva's position, and that's why he's known as the best of the demigods, because he's understanding the position of Lord Krishna and he's Krishna's best devotee, then it should be very easy for us to just follow in the footsteps of Lord Śiva, glorify Lord Śiva for all of his wonderful qualities, but simultaneously understand that he's not the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He might be a personality of Godhead, but he's not the Supreme Personality of Godhead like that. And this is a theme that is touched on throughout the Vedic scriptures. Probably the most well-known story in this regard is the lifting of Govardhan Hill, when Krishna was just a little boy, and with the little finger of his left hand he lifted the whole hill, mountain if you like, of Govardhan. Can you imagine what in reality what we can lift with our little finger if we're able to balance something on it? I was playing a pair of cartels today, I'm lucky if I'm able to lift and hold, a cartel on the little finger of my left hand. So Krishna's lifting a whole mountain, and he lifts it to protect all the citizens from the dramatic rainfall. And the reason there was dramatic rainfall is simply because Lord Krishna instructed his father, Nanda Maharaj. He instructed him not to, there was an annual worship of Lord Indra, who's mentioned in the purport today. So Lord Indra is also one of the prominent demigods. And the residents of Vrindavan would hold a puja, a ceremony glorifying and appreciating Lord Indradev once a year. And Lord Krishna, baby Krishna really, just a boy, instructed his father, no, don't do that, because this is actually misleading people, thinking that Lord Indra is responsible for everything. Lord Indra is in charge, actually, of what we would call, he's the supreme weatherman. He's in charge of weather like that. But it doesn't mean that he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead like that. So Lord Krishna's point to his father was, no, don't do this, because we need people to understand the complete picture and not just a partial picture like that. The Russians of the Soviet Union years ago, that was one of their philosophies, that was one of their tactics, I should say, one of their strategies. that they would deprive the people of food, and they would store all the grains themselves in big government warehouses and deprive people of the food, and people would be literally starving. And then they would say, well, where's your God? This was a way of trying to smash or force people to be atheistic, if you like. So people had a natural inclination to accept the existence of God. So the government would orchestrate a kind of famine, if you like, withholding food from people. People would be starving. The government would then say, well, where's your God? Why is your God not looking after you and feeding you, etc.? Oh, he's not able to. Okay, well, don't worry, the government will do so. The government will look after you. And then all the grains that they were storing, then they would release those and people would have bread to eat, etc., etc. And the whole idea is to look to the government as the supplier of everything, as opposed to somebody above the government. So this is a similar principle. Krishna was just wanting people not to be misled, thinking everything is coming from Lord Indra. Anyway, the story goes, that not the story, the pastime I should say goes, that Krishna advises Nanda Maharaj. Nanda Maharaj is nervous, his father is nervous to do this, because he's thinking Indra might get angry. So he withholds the puja, and that's exactly what happens then. Then Indra gets angry and thinks, well, why am I not getting my worship? And that's a tendency we all have in this world. If we think we're due something, or something has become part of our life, then when it's withheld, we're feeling that bereft of that. We're feeling that we're being denied something, and very quickly things that we're getting on a regular basis we think are our right and are due to us, like that. And then when it's being withheld, then the tendency is for us to get upset and get angry and all of those kind of things. So that's what Indra did. He got angry. As I said, he's the supreme weatherman, so he then called on some of his big clouds, the Samvartika clouds, to come and punish the residents of Vrindavan because they'd stopped his worship for this year, to punish them with great inundation or rain, huge amounts of rainfall. Another thing that we see happening more and more in our modern world. That's a whole other story. So the rainfall came, and the residents of Vrindavan were very worried, very afraid. The rivers were rising, the water levels were rising, and they were fearing that they would drown, they would succumb to this. So Krishna then just lifted up Govardhan Hill with his little finger and says, don't be worried, it's not a problem. It was like one massive umbrella that protected them from the worst kind of rain that Indra could summon like that. So understanding this point about the relationship between Krishna and all living entities, and the relationship that we have with Krishna, ultimately that relationship we have, it's equal and open to every single one of us, however high or low we might be on the hierarchy of the material world. And it's all just dependent on our desire to enter that loving relationship with Krishna, free from any motivation or desire, etc. So Krishna would instruct people in that way, showing them that, some demigod might think that they're supreme, and we may even be foolish enough to think somehow or another they're supreme, but ultimately they're not. They're like the example I think Śūla-Prabhupada gave was, in a government you have the cabinet and all the ministers, the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Environment and Education and Economy and all those different ministers. But then you have a Prime Minister. So the demigods are like the ministers, looking after all the different affairs of the world, of the universe I should say. But Krishna, if you like, is the Prime Minister. And once that is understood and that relationship is clear, then it benefits everybody, because it's understanding things as they actually are. And again, in today's purport, do I have time? Well, I should actually. I should just make one reference to the fact that if we don't understand that relationship properly between Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and Shastra of course talks about that, Krishna as tu bhagavān swayam, Krishna himself in the Bhagavad Gita, aham savasya prabhavo. There are so many references to Krishna and his position as the Supreme Person, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But if we don't understand that, and we're seeing any given demigod, whoever the demigod might be, as the Supreme Person, ultimately that's impersonalism. And of course the whole essence of Krishna consciousness is to develop a personal relationship with the Supreme Person. But ultimately that's impersonalism, because we're denying ultimately we're denying the existence of a supreme person, or replacing that supreme person with somebody else who isn't. Just like we can't go to the moon because it's a heavenly planet unless we're qualified and have the body to do so. So we're effectively replacing Krishna, or the supreme person, with somebody else who isn't qualified to be in that position, and that's ultimately impersonalism. And that's something that Srila Prabhupada, in his own pranam mantras that we chant every day, Namo Vishnupādaya Krishna Prasnaya Bhutale Śrīmate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Sarasvati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Niveshesha Sunyavadi Paschita Deshatanane. That one of Srila Prabhupada, his main mission, if you like, in coming to the West to present Krishna consciousness, was to rid the world, free the world of impersonalism, and even worse, voidism. So that was, if you like, Srila Prabhupada's mission, to do that. And he tells this story that, actually he tells it in relation not just to impersonalists, but also actually to the scientific, at least the atheistic scientific community. And he cites those two, impersonalists and atheistic scientists, as some of the most stubborn people that you will find. And that comes from having a level of intelligence, and you get attached to your understanding of things. So Prabhupada gives the story. Well, first he makes the point that a combination of intelligence and stubbornness is problematic, because people never want to give up their ideas, even if their ideas are exposed to be inferior. Like all the ideas that we grow up with and come with, when you put them, when you come to Krishna consciousness and you read Srila Prabhupada's books, you can see how many things that so-called norms that we grew up on. Like, for instance, here in Ireland as an example, eating meat. What was ever wrong with eating meat? When, until I came in contact, at least initially indirectly, to Prabhupada's teachings through other people. Up until that point, I never knew there was anything wrong with eating meat, the blood and flesh of living sentient beings, that they would be it never dawned on me there was anything wrong with that. But it was. It's fundamentally wrong. So the whole Irish nation, if you like, is and was and is heading in the wrong direction if they think that that diet is going to help them, whether it's going to help them physically or environmentally, but ultimately spiritually, and from a moral point of view, that taking the life of other living creatures and of sentient beings like that, yeah, everyone's thinking that's fine. Doesn't mean it's fine just because they think it's fine like that. So it's only when we come to Krishna consciousness that we can put all of these types of things into context. So the story that Prabhupada gives, short story, but people who, as I say, who see themselves as intelligent, society sees them as intelligent, they find it really tough to actually change their ways and give up their ideas. They become very attached to them, and to change is an acceptance of, they have to accept that they've been on a wrong path like that, and that can be very challenging for people. So the story Prabhupada gives is there's two men, and they're arguing about, they have something they want to cut. I can't remember, is it some plastic? Well, it probably wouldn't be plastic actually, but whether it's cloth or whether it's this or whether it's that, they have something that needs to be cut, and they're arguing what's the best way. Is the best way to use a scissors, or is the best way to use a knife like that? So then there's an argument, and again they're both attached to their, one is saying the knife is better, one is saying the scissors are better, and they're getting attached like that. And the argument gets heated, and they get quite passionate like that. And the guy who has the knife, he's a bigger guy, he's a stronger guy. He says, listen, if you don't accept that the knife is the best thing to use, then I'm gonna throw you in the river. There's a river in there, then I'm gonna throw you in that river, and you're gonna drown or whatever. And the guy won't give up. He says, well, he says, no. He says, I'm sorry. He says, I can't even swim, so I don't want to be thrown in the river. But I'm telling you, the scissors are the best way. I know the scissors are the best way. So the fight. So eventually, the guy with the knife, he throws the guy with the scissors into the water, and the guy goes underwater. He sort of scrabbles to get back. He's gone up and down a few times, and the guy with the knife on the riverbank now is saying, just admit, just accept that the knife is the better tool to use, and then I'll pull you out of the river. But the guy, as he's going down for his third, fourth, and last time, rather than just even just temporarily accepting, that the knife is the better way, just to get the guy to take him out of the river. So stubborn and so proud that he's convinced his argument is right. As he's going down for the last time and now he's drowning, he raises his hand in the air and his two fingers out like that, like a pair of scissors, and as if to wind up the other guy with the knife, to wind him up. He's doing this, you know, as he's going down, 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 down. He's using the scissors to indicate, no, the scissors are best, and then he disappears for the last time. So Prabhupada is just using that analogy that all of us actually, he did use it in the context of the people who present impersonal philosophy, and also, as I said, atheistic scientists. He did actually use it in relation to them. But you can apply it to all of us. All of us have that stubborn streak. No, I'm right, you know. And of course, that stubbornness and that determination that we're right leads us into all sorts of trouble in life. And in the context of today's purport and verse, it's understanding that the demigods are wonderful, truly, truly wonderful. They are deserving of all our respects and all of our appreciation for the fact that they have such good karma. They've engaged in so much pious activity to you know, achieve the role that they have. But ultimately, they're still jivas. They're not Vishnu-tattva, they're jiva-tattva. And ultimately, they are servants of Krishna. And their glory is all the more enhanced and all the better when, as well as the role they have and where they live and all the great benefits they have, their real glory is like Lord Śiva, Vaishnavanam Yatasambhu, that he is the best of the devotees because he understands Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And for all of us, demigods and anyone else alike, once we understand that and then act on the basis of that relationship, then our lives become perfect. Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna. Glories to Śrīla Prabhupada. Śrīla Prabhupada.